High above Nazi-occupied Europe, at nearly 25,000 feet, the sky was a battlefield. Engines roared, machine guns thundered, and black flak clouds tore open the air like exploding wounds. In the middle of that chaos, an event occurred that defied logic, training and survival itself. A German fighter didn't just collide with an American B-17 flying fortress. It flew into it. And somehow, impossibly, the American bomber landed with the enemy aircraft still inside it. This is not a legend. This is not an exaggeration. This is one of the strangest, most unbelievable air combat incidents of World War II. And it actually happened. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was not just a bomber. It was a statement of industrial power and relentless intent. Built to fly deep into enemy territory, it carried massive bomb loads over hundreds of miles, often without fighter escort. Brutally slow, painfully exposed, yet terrifyingly tough. With up to 1350 caliber machine guns, reinforced aluminum skin, and a reputation for surviving damage that should have destroyed any aircraft, the B-17 became a symbol of American air dominance. But no matter how strong it was, every mission meant flirting with death. On a cold morning in 1943, one particular B-17 crew lifted off from an airbase in England. Their target was deep inside Germany, industrial, infrastructure critical to the Nazi war machine. The men aboard joked nervously. They had done this before. They knew the drill. What they didn't know was that they were flying into one of the deadliest fighter interceptions of the war. As the bomber formation crossed the coast, German radar stations lit up. Orders were issued. Luftwaffe fighters scrambled. The hunters were coming. Among those scrambled pilots was a German fighter ace flying a single-engine interceptor, fast, agile, and armed to kill bombers. He had been trained to aim for engines, cockpits, wings. He had one job: destroy the flying fortress. As he climbed into the sun, he spotted the bomber stream ahead, dozens of silver aircraft, contrails streaking the sky like scars. He selected one target, and dove. The B-17's crew felt it before they saw it. The aircraft shook violently as cannon rounds ripped through the fuselage. One engine coughed, then caught fire. Alarm screamed. Smoke filled compartments. Gunners opened fire in all directions, tracer rounds slicing through the sky. The German fighter made pass after pass, getting closer each time. Too close. In a final attack run, something went horribly wrong. Whether due to damaged controls, wake turbulence, or a split-second miscalculation, the German fighter slammed directly into the B-17. Metal screamed. Wings shattered. Glass exploded. The fighter didn't bounce off. It embedded itself into the bomber. The cockpit of the German aircraft was crushed into the B-17's fuselage, tangled in aluminum, wires, and fuel lines. Inside the American bomber, the crew waited for the explosion. It never came. Silence followed. Chaos. The crew looked around in disbelief. Sections of the plane were destroyed. The tail controls barely responded. One engine was gone, and lodged inside the aircraft was the shattered remains of a German fighter. The enemy pilot was dead. The bomber was still flying, barely. The pilot of the B-17 knew one thing: they could not continue the mission. Bombs were jettisoned. The aircraft turned west, limping back toward England. Every minute felt like an hour. If the wreckage shifted, the plane would tear itself apart. If fuel ignited, everyone would die. If German fighters returned, they wouldn't stand a chance. But somehow the sky stayed empty. As the English coast finally appeared, ground crews couldn't believe what they saw: a B-17 flying at low altitude, missing parts, trailing smoke, and carrying the remains of an enemy aircraft fused into its body. The bomber lined up for landing, shaking violently. Wheels touched down. The aircraft rolled and stopped. The crew had survived. Mechanics ran toward the plane, then froze. Embedded in the fuselage was a German fighter. The damage was so severe that some believed the bomber should have broken apart mid-air. Instead, it had landed, with its enemy still inside. Photographs were taken. Reports were written. Pilots stared in silence. No one had ever seen anything like it. The crew was grounded temporarily. The aircraft was written off. The war didn't pause for miracles. More missions followed. More men died. More machines fell from the sky. But this incident spread quietly among airmen, a reminder that survival sometimes came down to impossible luck. This was not just a bizarre accident. It showed the brutal closeness of air combat. The thin line between hunter and hunted, the randomness of survival in war. 2 pilots entered the sky that day. Only 1 aircraft returned, and it returned carrying its enemy. To understand how a German fighter could fly into a B-17 and not instantly explode, you have to understand how chaotic World War II air combat really was. These battles weren't clean dogfights like in movies. They were violent, crowded, and brutally close. Fighters attacked bombers at closing speeds of over 400 miles per hour. Pilots had only seconds to aim, fire, and pull away. One tiny miscalculation, half a second too late, meant collision. In this case, the German pilot likely committed to his attack, run even after his aircraft was already damaged. Smoke, vibration, or loss of elevator control could have made recovery impossible. At that speed, there was no second chance. The German pilot probably saw it coming. A wall of aluminum, spinning propellers, machine gun barrels flashing fire. There was no time to eject. Early war fighters didn't even have ejection seats. Escape meant rolling the aircraft, opening the canopy, and jumping, an impossible task at point-blank range. His fighter struck the bomber nose first, instantly killing him. In a cruel twist of fate, his final attack still failed to destroy the B-17. Inside the bomber, the crew expected fire. They expected the fuel tanks to ignite. They expected the aircraft to snap in half. They expected death. Instead, they heard grinding metal and felt a violent jolt that knocked men off their feet. Then, nothing. No explosion, no fireball. Just the sickening realization that something was stuck inside their airplane. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The B-17 was never designed to survive something like this. The only reason it did was because the German fighter struck at an angle that absorbed energy instead of detonating fuel. The bomber's reinforced fuselage acted like a trap, swallowing the wreckage instead of breaking apart. Control cables were damaged. Hydraulic pressure was unstable. The aircraft was technically unflyable. But war doesn't care about technically. The B-17's pilot had seconds to decide. Order the crew to bail out over enemy territory, attempt a controlled crash, or try the unthinkable, fly home. Bailing out meant capture or death. The plane was still barely responding, so he chose the only option that offered hope. He turned west. Every movement of the controls felt wrong. The aircraft yawed unpredictably. The airframe vibrated violently. Fuel leaked somewhere behind them. The co-pilot helped manually trim the aircraft. Gunners stopped firing and braced themselves. The navigator recalculated constantly, afraid one wrong turn would stall the bomber. No one spoke about it, but everyone knew. One mistake and they were dead. Normally, a crippled bomber was easy prey, but sometimes chaos saves lives. The German fighter formations were already low on fuel. Allied escort fighters were approaching. Anti-aircraft units assumed the B-17 would crash on its own. So it was ignored. And that neglect saved every man on board. When the English coastline finally appeared, some crew members cried. Others went silent. One man reportedly laughed, pure shock, overwhelming fear. They weren't safe yet. Landing a damaged bomber was often deadlier than combat. The landing gear extended slowly, then locked. The pilot brought the aircraft down gently, afraid that any sudden movement would tear the wreckage loose. The bomber slammed onto the runway, bounced once, then rolled to a stop. The engines shut down. Only then did the men realize they were alive. Ground crews stared in stunned silence. They had seen damaged bombers before. They had seen missing wings and blown-out noses. But never this. A German fighter embedded like a spear inside an American bomber. It looked unreal, like something from a nightmare. Officers ordered photographs immediately. The U.S. Army Air Forces didn't publicize the incident. They didn't want crews believing survival depended on miracles. They didn't want pilots taking reckless risks. So the story lived mostly in squadron whispers and veterans' memories. Until decades later, this wasn't about heroism alone. It proved how brutal aerial warfare truly was. How thin the line between life and death remained. How machines and men were pushed far beyond design limits. The B-17 wasn't invincible. It was just stubborn. Stories like this cemented the B-17's legend. Not because it couldn't be destroyed, but because sometimes it refused to die. Thousands were shot down. Tens of thousands of airmen never returned. But moments like this remind us why crews trusted the aircraft with their lives. Somewhere in a scrapyard or archive, pieces of that aircraft disappeared into history, but the moment remains. A German fighter flew into a B-17, and the B-17 came home. For decades, historians questioned whether such an incident could truly happen. A fighter embedded in a bomber sounded like wartime exaggeration, a story airmen told to cope with trauma. But records confirmed it. Maintenance reports, witness statements, photographs taken on the airfield. This wasn't myth. It was rare but real. And it wasn't completely alone. By 1943 and 1944, some Luftwaffe pilots were trained quietly for a terrifying tactic: ramming. When ammunition ran out or when bombers refused to go down, pilots were sometimes ordered to sacrifice their aircraft by striking wings, tails, or control surfaces. The goal wasn't suicide. The goal was collision and escape. But escape almost never happened. The German pilot in this incident may not have intended to ram, but he flew with the same fatal closeness. From the outside, air combat looks fast and heroic. Inside the cockpit, it was claustrophobic terror. Pilots fought exhaustion, oxygen deprivation, freezing temperatures, and the constant knowledge that one mistake meant fire, falling, or suffocation. Decision-making slowed. Vision tunneled. Reflex replaced reason. That's how impossible collisions happened. Years after the war, surviving crew members were interviewed. They didn't describe bravery. They described confusion. One gunner said he thought the world had ended because the explosion never came. Another said the sound of tearing metal haunted him more than flak. One man admitted he never flew again. People often ask, why didn't it blow up? The answer lies in chance. The fighter struck away from main fuel tanks. The angle dissipated force instead of puncturing everything. Fuel vapors didn't ignite. One spark. And this would be a different story. War survival often depends on centimeters. The German pilot never returned. No name. No grave. No ceremony. His aircraft vanished into Allied territory. His final seconds frozen in aluminum. War remembers victors. But the sky remembers everyone. This story isn't about celebrating destruction. It's about understanding cost. 2 young pilots entered combat that day. Trained, hopeful, scared. Only one machine landed. But nobody truly won. World War II produced millions of moments like this. Small, strange, horrifying miracles buried beneath major battles and famous names. History books focus on generals. But war is lived by individuals. And sometimes history